All right, welcome to my nightmare. I'm back. I tested a bunch of uppers for positional point of impact shift, and if you already know what I'm talking about, I'll put a link in the description so you can jump straight to the results. Otherwise, if you want to get an explanation of what I'm talking about, or you just want to hear me yap, I'm going to talk about what it is, why it's important, do some shooting, and then the results will be at the end. So what we're looking for is the point of impact shift that AR-15s experience when you put torque on the upper. The theory is that if you put torque on the rail where it interfaces with the upper, you're going to have a point of impact shift. I say it's a theory because there are some counterpoints, one of them being that you tend to change your natural point of aim, you change the way the rifle interacts with your body, the way the rifle acts under recoil as you apply more force. And so I think there's a valid argument that the body mechanics, the changes there have an effect. But what I wanted to do was test a bunch of non-standard AR uppers. And I consider this to be standard, right? This is what you expect. And so I went out and got a bunch of rifles that had uppers that don't follow the standard geometry. The theory being that it would make them more insensitive to changes in body position. And we'll talk more about that later. But I ended up getting 12, I think, including a mil-spec baseline BCM upper to use. And I just want to say thanks real quick to all the friends who loan rifles. I reached out to a bunch of companies and nobody was interested. Nobody would even return my emails. So I ended up having to borrow everything. I ended up with a Cobalt and a Sons of Liberty Gunworks, thanks to Jake, who I linked up with through YouTube comments of all things. I got a Colt monolithic, which I didn't use, this one here actually, just because it was too different from the rest of them, too short, and I didn't feel like it would produce meaningful results. I got that, a MCX Virtus 16-inch, a Daniel Defense, or two Daniel Defenses, one in 308, one in 5.56. The 5.56 I would say is a good analog for a mil-spec upper. Just the way it's built here, you can see it's kind of more like a mil-spec upper. I think the upper itself is a standard upper, but it's got a pretty rigid rail system. Those were from Jay, who I appreciate those very much. The LMT and the BCM control rifle were both from my friend Mike, who you've probably seen on the channel here before. And then the LWRC was from Dave, who, I appreciate him linking up with me to get me that. And then lastly, the Springfield ATC and the Aero Enhanced were from other Dave, who actually drove a couple hours to come help me out. So that was a massive help, and I really appreciate that. And all the ammo was provided by myself. Again, nobody wants to work with me, so I can still be trusted for now. The test itself was 5 rounds from a prone position, what I consider neutral, like what you think of warm control with an AR. The next 5 were prone with a really heavy preload, probably heavier than you would typically do, but I wanted to accentuate the results. And then the last 5 rounds were standing from a bag. And I felt like that would be a good sampling of the conditions you might shoot these in. The biggest issue with this test is human error. If I'm applying inconsistent pressure, specifically when I'm loading the bipod, it's gonna really skew the results. And I think that's the biggest challenge to the validity of the test. I'd love to have some kind of like machine or mechanical way to do it consistently, but I couldn't come up with anything. Because if I'm applying inconsistent pressure within the 5 rounds, or even across different rifles, it's gonna mess up the results. And then of course, if I'm shooting poorly, right? Some of these rifles I shot for the first time the day of the test. Fatigue certainly was an issue. I shot a ton of rounds really quickly, and I started to get tired. And then also a cold start. Like I shot the LMT first. I made them random so that they'd all get the best look, but I shot the LMT first, which typically shoots very well, and I think because it was a cold start, I had some struggles there. The sample size is also fairly small, and the rifles, some of them were more or less accurate. For example, the MCX was just too inaccurate to really assign any value to, which is expected, right? Because they're dog shit. So why is this important? I think it's self-evident with some of the rifles, specifically the BCM. But in the case of the others where it's just like a 0.2, 0.3, whatever, small shift. And one of my favorite comment was probably not this one, but this one. And I know there's a little snark there, but it's actually a super valid point. Why do we care about such a small shift? And I thought about that after after doing all this testing. I don't think it matters for most people. I think most shooting conditions, I think most environments, it doesn't really matter. It's really just those extreme examples. Like I've put up an example here. This would be a half MOA target with a 0.2 shift. If you're dead on perfect versus if you're just slightly off, it could mean the difference between a hit or a miss in this case. But again, I don't think it matters in most cases, and I don't think it matters for most people. Why I think this whole concept is important, and more important than we give it credit for, is because, yeah, you might miss some targets if you have a bit of a shift, but I think more importantly, when you're trying to judge the accuracy or inaccuracy of a rifle, not applying consistent fundamentals while you're zeroing is going to change your perception. And yeah, we can say, oh, well, you just have to have good fundamentals, but that doesn't really apply in a modern shooting context, right? Because so often we're shooting off of bags, or we're shooting off of barrels or straps, or in weird positions where you can't apply good fundamentals. And so I think we're targeting these uppers specifically that have good resiliency. They're insensitive to bad fundamentals, and I think that's important, right? Because why start on a platform that's going to require a more stringent set of circumstances to shoot well when you can start on a platform that's going to give you good resiliency, good insensitivity to weird shooting situations? Okay, so this right here, the LMT, you can see the first dot is that warm control. I probably didn't shoot as well here as I probably could have. The second dot is with that heavy preload, and then the third dot is going to be standing. I really liked these two groups, and I think I may have skewed the results here a little bit by shooting cold poorly, but I'm not sure about that. The Daniel Defense here, the 5.56, is probably a good analog for your standard mil-spec upper, and you can see right off the bat that we've got a pretty decent amount of shift. I just want to remind everybody that this isn't a test of accuracy. This is just a test of the point impact shift. So I got them roughly zeroed, and what I'm doing is I'm measuring the center point of each group to the center point of the other respective groups. So their relative position to the dots doesn't really matter. I also think the results of this one might be skewed a little bit. You can see all but 3 rounds were right in line. So I don't know if that was individual inaccuracy of the LPR or what happened there. I think maybe that was just inconsistent pressure on the gun, which is that human error issue that we were talking about. If you see me hand cycling often here, it's because most of these guns aren't mine and they're set up for cans, which I didn't have. So they were all undergassed. So I had to hand cycle a lot of them. This Larue did pretty well. I wasn't surprised by that. The Cobalt I was a little disappointed in. We had quite a bit of shift here. It put up really excellent groups, but the shift was significant for such a rugged upper. Jake, who loaned this to me, had a huge break on it. It was pretty fun to shoot. It's a nice group standing. So the Sons of Liberty gun works. I'm not 100% sure which model this was. A nice rifle, but lots of shift, unfortunately. Well, comparatively, right? I think in most situations, this shift wouldn't be an issue. It's, it's just those extreme circumstances. shifts, and this is the factory barrel. But it also showed very little shift. And I think for a factory rifle, this was good. I want to say it was the only factory rifle that performed this well, other than the Ridgeline. It's just not what I expected from the LWRC. The MCX continuing its legacy of being absolute dog shit. I'll put up the results, but I don't think it's really meaningful. And don't get me wrong, I have two MCXs, and I like them a lot, but they're both SBRs. I don't think they have any application for a precision rifle. So this one actually kind of surprised me, and I've done this exact test before, and I saw about half the shift I saw here. So I don't know if something's loose with this rifle. I'm probably going to want to check that. But don't get me wrong, this wasn't a mistake. I was aiming at that second dot. It had a huge shift. The last time I did this, it was probably 0.6. So I don't know what happened there. And that's a BCM 18-inch white oak barrel in a Geissele handguard. Fairly accurate, but a lot of shift. This one didn't surprise me a ton either. This is the Aero Enhanced. I think if you're trying to do it budget, and somebody mentioned in the comments of the last video, if you're trying to do this budget, I think the Aero Enhanced is the way to go. Just pick your barrel and send it. And then this was the best performer of the day. This one had the least shift. I think it was like a 1/4 inch or something. But it's not surprising, right? Because this is a fully free-floated chassis system. There is no interaction of the barrel with the forend. And if they made something like this, but the rail was flat with an ARCA section, I think this would be a killer setup. I've never shot one of these before. It was very cool. It was a 6 arc also, should probably mention. And this was the 308, so this is really a different upper, unlike the 5.56 version. This is more what I call semi-monolithic. This was shooting Hornady ELDs in 308. So I don't really have much of an opinion. I just wanted to put the results up for you guys to decide for yourselves. I don't want to assign a specific amount of shift to an upper, because I think if you put 10 different shooters down, you get 10 different results, just because it was all based on how much pressure I was putting into the gun. So rather, I would just rank them best to worst, and then you can pick for yourself. I would say if you're looking to build a precision rifle, I would pick one of the uppers that has less shift. I mean, that makes sense. The ones I couldn't get my hands on that I think are worth looking at, probably Mega, Seekins, Voltor has a monolithic upper now. There's a handful I couldn't get. JP I was trying to get. So I think it'd probably be worth testing those too. But just in terms of what I have here, pick whatever you think is going to work for you. I really like the LMT, the LWRC, the Ridgeline. I'd love that ATC if it was just a more usable system. But yeah, this was a huge pain in the ass and a pretty large cost to do. So I hope that you guys are able to use it in a meaningful way, and maybe we'll look out for the next project.